Welcome back to the Budget Archive. My name is Mitch. Today we've got a bit of a cool Water Allies list for you, running level 1 Silvie into Nico for a game finisher. Let's get on with the deck list. Now this list is mostly a level 1 Silvie Water Allies list, however it does run Nico with Magebane Lash, allowing you to go for a late game massive hit, or using Ravishing Finale to mill your opponent out to end the game. With that, we're running Spirit of Water. Silvie level 1 with the on-enter ability of the next animal or beast ally card you activate this turn enters the field with additional buff counter. This is great for a lot of our allies, as a lot of them are animals, especially with Froglet Footman, as you'll see, giving it the buff counter, allowing it to start preventing damage. We're then running level 2 Nico. This is mainly for late game, for long games. A lot of the time you may just stay on level 1 Silvie and just attack with allies and deal a ton of damage to your opponent, killing them that way. However, if you do need the extra life, or if you need to just go for the game win, you go into Nico, hopefully survive another turn with help of your taunters, and then bring out Magebane Lash, getting some lash counters, and then using a Ravishing to hopefully either kill your opponent or mill out whatever they've got left of their deck. With that, we are running Bulwark Sword. One thing to note with this is that you can attack with this using Silvie level 1. It ends up just being a 2-2 sword or paying 2 to attack with it. However, with Nico, it is getting that +1 bonus, so you are able to attack for 3 with it. It's really just in there as another materialization option and early damage using Silvie. However, a lot of the time you may not end up using this. We are running both Fire Resistance Bauble and Water Resistance Bauble in the main board. With this, as always, depending on what your local meta is, you can run Wind Resistance Bauble main board and Fire side. Just really depends what you're planning on coming up against. Nullify Mirror. This is a bit of a pricey card in the deck. With this being an ally deck and you're doing constant chip damage, trying to stop your opponent from gaining any advantage and just killing them fast. Often if you're running into wind decks, they can be running Veiling Breeze, which can just be a game loser for you. So having this is just an option to bring out, stop your opponent from being able to Veiling Breeze and just hopefully get a kill through what would have been them stopping damage. It's just a great thing to have in the deck. Safeguard Amulet. As usual, great against Spellslinger decks and decks that are wanting to do non-combat damage to you. Whenever you banish it for the rest of the turn, whenever you would take non-attack damage, prevent 4 of that damage. Terraforming, again, for against those combat damage decks, running a lot of allies or massive swings. Banish this until end of turn, players can't declare attacks unless they pay 2 for each attack, and you can only activate it during your opponent's recollection phase. Water Resistance Bauble, same with the Fire Resistance Bauble and the Wind. Whatever way you want to run them, doesn't matter, just it depends on what local meta is doing. Magebane Lash. Now the important thing to note with this is level 2 Nico, which I didn't actually go over its ability. Whenever a card with flow memory is banished from your graveyard, put a Lash counter on Nico. And it has on champion hit, you may have that opponent put the top X cards of their deck into the graveyard, where X is the amount of Lash counters on Nico. So once you do go into Nico, you're going to be prioritising banishing floating memory from your graveyard, getting lash counters on her in order to bump up the Magebane Lash's damage. Because Magebane Lash has the effect of it getting +1 attack for each lash counter on Nico. Or sorry, on your champion, but in this situation being Nico. So effectively, you can quite often have 4 or 5 lash counters on Nico by the time you go for a massive swing, giving this +4/+5 attack. It also has the ability of on enter, put a lash counter on your champion. So if you use floating memory to bring this out, you're effectively going to be going, bring this out, put 2 lash counters total on Nico, allowing you to then swing for 2 straight away with it. It also has the Nico bonus of whenever your champion is dealt non-combat damage, recover 2. This is great into those Spellslinger decks like Pfizer or the Fire Guojars that are running around, because effectively, with their, especially the Fire Guojar decks, with their trigger of deal 1 damage to both champions, it'll do 1 damage to you, and then you'll recover 2. So that effect, with this, effectively turns it into a gain 1 life. So if you are running into a lot of spell damage or a lot of chip damage with non-combat damage, bringing this out is just something that's going to be a must-have for the deck. Temptations Facade. On enter, draw a card. 1 cost, meaning that once you're in Eco, you can banish flow memory, bring this out, giving you another lash counter as well as drawing you a card. It has the Nico bonus of tapping it and change the target of an activation that targets another non-champion object you control to it. This is effectively a way for you to protect your Magebane Lash from destruction effects or from just Zephyrs and bouncing them. So with this, especially with Zephyr effects, if you change the target to it, it leaves, it comes back, you're going to draw another card. But also, if your opponent thinks that being able to destroy your Magebane Lash is going to win them the game, this is another way to get around that and just giving you the chance to actually kill them without that interaction they would have. Vapor Jet Shield. This has unit link, so when it enters the field, you choose a unit you control and link it to it. If that link is broken, you would sacrifice this. Generally, this is going to be going on Nico level 1, so Nico's never going to be destroyed unless the game's over. So you'll just have Vapor Jet Shield on the field continually unless your opponent manages to destroy it. It has the effect of, if damage will be dealt to a linked unit, prevent 1 of that damage. So against a lot of ally decks, this is just king. You go into level 2 Nico, you bring this out. Hopefully you're banishing 2 float to bring it out. You're not always going to be able to do that, so even paying 1 float, getting you the lash counter on Nico, attaching this to Nico, you're then suddenly, instead of taking 2 damage from each ally, you're only going to be taking 1. And if you get this out early enough, ally deck's going to have a real hard time killing you. In the main board, we're running 4 copies of Chilling Touch. Now, I thought about running some fast speed floating memory like Freezing Steel main board. However, after a little bit of a consideration, I decided that this had a lot more impact on the game and could allow you to get that 1 step advantage on your opponent over something like Freezing Steel, which does very little to a lot of decks. It has the effect of banish a card at random from target opponent's memory, return that card to their memory at the beginning of the next end phase. With this, you're effectively going, I'm going to banish a card from your memory, and you're not going to have it for the whole of your next turn. On top of that, you've also got the floating memory side of it, which is always a bonus. We are running 4 copies of Evercurrent Raider. Now, everyone will know this from the Spectre decks that were running around before Ryle got banned. I undenied whether I wanted to run this or not. I was kind of looking at generic floating memory for water decks that would work with both Silvie and Nico without being class bonus locked. And this being a 2-drop 1/2 ally with floating memory means your opponent's effectively going, do I want to be taking 1 damage each turn from this, or would I rather just give you the floating memory now? And also, when you get into the late game and you either don't need the floating memory anymore, or your opponent's in a situation where just 1 damage will kill them, you can also pay 2 to ephemerate this, bring it back from your graveyard, make it ephemeral, and then attack for that 1 damage to kill. We're running 4 copies of Fractal Rain. One of the best water cards for this type of deck, where you're running a lot of flow memory, you're wanting to get that flow memory into your graveyard fast. This has Imbue too, so when you pay it, you reveal both cards that you paid to play it, and if they're both water, it will become imbued. And at the beginning of your recollection phase, if it is imbued, target player puts the top card of the deck into the graveyard. Generally, you're going to be targeting yourself, trying to mill all that floating memory from your deck into your graveyard. However, you do have the opportunity to also mill your opponent, especially if you've seen someone who's playing something like Scry the Skies, stack the top of their deck so that they draw the cards they want to on their next turn. You can then mill the top of their deck, making it so that they're unable to actually get those cards they wanted, effectively hurting their game plan. It also has Reservable. So a 2-cost Reservable effectively replaces itself out of your hand as being able to pay for something else. There isn't really a downside to it. Now, Froglip Footman. This is the card I mentioned along with Silvie level 1. It has the effect of, if damage will be dealt to it while it has buff counter on it, prevent 1 of that damage. So against a lot of ally decks that are wanting to try and remove your allies in order to let their board survive, because of course Wind Allies has like a lot of 2/3 allies, often they can flood the board with allies, kill all your things, and stop you from being able to actually gain a foothold. This is one of those cards in the deck that I thought about running 4 of, but with the floating memory count in this deck, I decided that we did want to keep some of our floating memory around to go into level 2 Nico and then Magebane and such, so I thought a 3 count was a pretty good middle ground for that. It has the ability as well of, on enter, you may banish a card with flow memory from your graveyard. If you do, put a buff counter on it. So effectively, if you go into level 1 Silvie, then you play this, also banishing a float, it suddenly becomes a 3/4. That not only is a 3/4 just insane, Frostborn Paladin is proof of that, but also whenever it would take damage, you prevent 1 of that. So it just makes it very, very hard for your opponent to kill it. I don't know if there's a single card in the game that actually kills this with 2 buff counters on it in 1 hit, without being like a level 3 Lorraine buffed up, or just a weapon used a couple of home by fires and such. There's most kill spells 4 damage, and all of those are only going to be doing 3 to this. Even the unpreventable ones, which like Sparklight, are only 3 damage. So a lot of the time, this is going to take 2 cards to kill, or 3 or 4 allies to actually get rid of. Frostbind. Negate target activation unless its controller pays 2. Banish card that has activation countered this way. Staple water card. Great in every deck. Allows you to have a bit of control over your opponent. And also means that if you've got nothing to do, you can just hold up 3 cards and interact with your opponent, stopping them from doing their game plan. Lunette, Frostbinder Priest. Has the effect of allies your opponent control enter the field rested. And if you have balance, which is where your hand and your memory are the same amount of cards, it gets +3 life. So with this, I'm actually surprised how cheap it is now. It used to be like a $12, $13 card and was just ridiculous to even get a hold of, let alone put into a budget deck. But now I believe it's like $3 or $4. If that, it might actually be down to 2 now. I need to double check once I do the price breakdown fully. It's just insane against ally decks and against any deck that's trying to remove your allies with other allies. This effectively tells your opponent, hey, you have to have some way to play the ally and then protect it from my allies before you're able to actually attack anything and kill it. Now it's important to note that you do need to have this balance to have it fairly protected, because if you aren't balanced and it's just a 1-1, there's a lot of removal in the game that's just going to kill it. Primordial Ritual. As additional cost to this, sacrifice an ally. Target player puts the top 2 cards of the deck into their graveyard, and it has floating memory. Now, we are running a lot of allies in this deck, and we do want to keep allies alive. We want to have them on the field to keep attacking. However, there's going to be a lot of situations where your opponent is just going to be killing one of your allies. There's nothing you can do about it. And in that situation, it might be beneficial for you to sacrifice the ally using Primordial Ritual, milling the top 2 cards of your deck into your graveyard, effectively giving you the floating memory of Primordial, floating memory of whatever you milled, and then if you're using this on something like an Evercurrent Raider, then you're getting the floating off that as well. So 1 card can effectively give you 2 or 3 floating memory. It's pretty good value, and we're going to run 4 of it. Pureling Footman. Now, this is the budget Tidestone Bovine. It's on attack. Look at the top card of your deck. You may put it into graveyard. It's a 2-drop 1/2. It is an animal, so it gets a buff counter off Silvie level 1. If you bring it out using that, making it a 2/3. 2-drop 2/3 is always good. 2-drop 1/2, still decent. Allows you to mill away that floating memory if you need to. And also allows you to know what's on top of your deck in case you are going to go into a Fractal Rain or something on your following turn. If you know that top card is something you want, you can just mill your opponent rather than yourself. Ravishing Finale. As an additional cost to activate this card, banish 2 cards of flow memory from the graveyard. We are running a lot of flow memory in this deck, of course, allowing us to pretty consistently play this card. It has on champion hit. For each damage counter on the hit champion, the controller puts the top 2 cards of the deck into their graveyard. Now, a lot of the time, this is doing 6 damage when it hits. Along with Magebane Lash and the Nico and the counters and everything, you can quite often be doing 11, 12 damage in one single hit. Along with the ally package, this ends up often with your opponent just being dead. But if they're not dead, like if Luxem or something along those lines where they're gaining a lot of life, or if they're playing Jin where they just refuse to die, then this is a good way to mill your opponent out in the game there and then. There's going to be very little interaction for them to have. Of course, there's cards like Crystallized Destiny, their water decks may have Song of Frost and such, so you've got to be careful with that. However, this is generally going to be your main way to end the game. Refracting Missile. Now, same as Evercurrent Raider, this is a generic floating memory. It is fast speed, so it's almost better. However, we are only running 4 copies of Fractal Rain, so within this deck, with us not having Fracturize because of it being a budget deck, this is generally only going to be doing 2 damage, maybe 3 damage in a good game. So it's not really there as a massive damage dealer. However, it can be used alongside Ravishing Finale. So if you have enough influence, you go for the Ravishing Finale for kill, and your opponent plays something like Crystallized Destiny, this is a good option to have to then let the Crystallized Destiny resolve, respond by playing this, pop the Destiny, and then allow the Ravishing to go through and kill. Also, early game, it's a good thing to just have. You are doing +1 damage, so you're always going to be doing 1 damage with this. So if you've got nothing better to do, or for some reason your hand's bricked, you can just play this, deal 1 damage to your opponent, use it to level up. Rippleback Terrapin. Now this has class bonus Spell Shroud, so while you are Silvie level 1, this will be protected from spells. However, once you go into Nico level 2, you're going to find that that Spell Shroud is gone, so you just got to keep that in mind if you do really want to keep this alive, and Nico level 2 isn't required, then you may want to consider that when deciding what to materialise. This has the on-enter effect of you may banish card flow memory from your graveyard if you do put a buff counter on it, and draw a card. Now, people will look at this and go, that looks very, very familiar. It's effectively a 4-cost Frostborn Paladin with 1 extra life and 1 less damage. So, anyone who's been around a little while and watched Water Silvie do well at Ascents in the past, this card is a powerhouse of the deck. Not only does it replace a card, of course, from the floating memory being banished, allowing you to effectively go +1 with it, but you're also getting a 2/5 with Spell Shroud. So your opponent's going to have a very hard time to get rid of this, and alongside a lot of your other allies, you're often going to have your opponent's board cleared. Seaside Regalia, though. This is another card that I was very surprised actually fit into a budget list. It used to be like a $20 card, and I have no idea why it's so cheap now. Probably because Water hasn't really been super popular recently. There haven't been a lot of ally decks, especially animal-based decks like Genbu running around. I do expect that to pick up, so this may quickly become a non-budget card again. However, for now, it fits in the deck, so we're going to run it. It has class bonus and elemental bonus, so you have to be Water to use the ability, as well as be Tamer. So once you go into Nico again, you're not going to have access to this. However, with this deck being a predominantly ally-based level 1 deck, often you're going to find that you are able to use this, and once you go into level 2, you're most likely not going to care about this anyway, so it just felt worthwhile running. Has the effect of pay 2, banish it, draw a card into your memory, so you're going +1 with this if you've milled it off of something like a Fractal Rain, and then until end of turn, animal and beast ally cards you activate this turn into the field with additional buff counter on them. So not only is this a 3-drop 2/2 that can just keep chipping away damage, but once it goes to the graveyard, you're able to pay the 2 during your recollection phase, draw a card to memory, recollect, draw for turn, and then play a couple animals out, which of course a lot of the allies in this deck are animals, so you're going to be getting that buff counter pretty consistently. When you combine this with a Froglet Footman, floating memory, and a Silvie level 1 ability, Froglet Footman effectively becomes a 4/5, and good luck killing a 4/5 Froglet Footman. Storm of Thorns. Now, I did up and R about whether to put this in the deck or not. Of course, we're not going to Nico level 2 very often. We will, well, most games you've got a level 2 just to finish the game off. However, it was a situation where you kind of look at the floating memory side of it, and that's not really why I ended up running it. The main effect of this card is if damage will be dealt to a unit you control this turn, prevent 1 of that damage. If damage prevented this way had a unit as its source, deal 1 damage to that unit. So a lot of the time, especially with your Froglet Footman and your Rippleback Terrapin and such, they're going to be trying to kill it with allies, which are generally going to be doing 2 damage. So if you play this, it prevents 1 of the damage. The Footman itself will prevent a damage, so you're effectively giving the Footman full protection for the turn. And if your opponent is going for like a spell kill on one of them, that may just be just enough. This gives you that protection to then just save it a little bit more. Also, if your opponent is attacking your face with Wind Allies, this just allows you to half the damage you're going to be taking. Thronekeeper Bullfrog, a 3/4/04 with Taunt and generic floating memory. So in this deck, of course, we're trying to have as much generic floating memory as possible, so when you do mill it off Fractal Rain, you're always going to have access to it. However, we are also trying to keep our allies alive as long as possible, and with this, it being a Taunter, meaning your opponent's going to have to remove this before they're able to kill any of your other allies with attack damage. Not only giving you that floating memory, but also saving either your face or your allies from 4, 5, maybe 6 damage total. And alongside that, with something like Storm of Thorns, it's going to prove very hard for your opponent to try kill this. Tidestone Bovine has on attack, target player puts the top 2 cards of their deck into their graveyard. Now, 3 cost, 1/2, not great stat line. Does have floating memory, but the floating memory is locked to Silvie level 1. So generally you are going to be using this floating memory to level up into level 2 Nico over other generic floating memory. But the on attack ability just makes it so good because you're able to just consistently mill. A lot of the time you're going to bring this out with Silvie level 1's ability, giving it a buff counter, making it a 2/3. So 3 drop, 2/3, good stat line in this game of course. But having that on attack trigger of putting the top 2 cards into your graveyard as well, alongside that, just makes it a real powerhouse. A lot of the time your opponent is going to remove this as fast as possible, because when you're constantly milling your deck and just getting all that floating memory into your bin, you can become very dangerous to them. Wave Rider Protector. Now this is really a worse off Thronekeeper Bullfrog. Of course, Taunt and Floating Memory are both locked behind class bonus Guardian, so you do have to be level 2 before this has any real effect on the game. However, I was looking at different options for Floating Memory and different ally options, and I just couldn't find anything that I felt was better than this in terms of being milled. It is Floating Memory once you go to Nico and then go for the Ravishing Finale. And then also if you do just bring this out early, you're able to just keep chipping away for 1 damage, and your opponent's in a situation of, do I leave this alive and effectively give me a taunt for when I go level 2? Or do they remove it now, giving me access to the floating memory once I go up to Nico level 2? In the recording of this video, I realised that although budget decks won't be running Censor, the high competitive decks definitely will be. And Censor is something that will completely destroy this deck if you do not have access to your floating memory. So in that, I've made one small change to the deck, just adding in these 2 Unbroken Mustangs. And in order to fit them into the deck, I did take out a single Purling Footman and a Wave Rider Protector. Now, you could go up to running 3 Unbroken Mustangs, possibly a 4th sideboard. However, at the moment, because Censor isn't being played as much as it used to be, I have decided to only run 2 main board and none sideboard. But if you do find that you're running into Censor quite a bit, that is something you could look at upgrading. We are running Beast Bomb Boots in the sideboard. You are running a lot of animals, so you're generally going to have some way to have something on the field to activate this. However, I did feel like Safeguard Amulet was the safer choice main board, because if they do manage to somehow remove your whole board and then go for the spell damage kill, Beast Bomb Boots isn't going to do too much. So with that, whatever bauble you don't need, you're generally going to bring this in. Of course, we're running Wind Resistance bauble in the sideboard. As said before, whatever bauble you think is going to be least likely for you to play into at locals, run that in sideboard. Freezing Steel. Now, when I started designing this deck, we were right in the Royal meta. Ensol was running rampant. This is hilarious against Ensol. It effectively reads, next time 1 or more items would enter the field this turn, those items enter the field rested instead. So not only is it a 1-drop floating memory, but it effectively says, hey Ensol, you can't do anything. Now, with the new Wake Up and Soul Sword, of course, they still can. They can attack using their champion, sacking a sword, waking their champion back up. But that just means you're not going to be getting that chip damage from those swords, and they're not going to be able to break the swords themselves to give them the buff on the rain. I did look at running this main board. However, I just decided that Chilling Touch was a better option, and if you do get into a situation where you just feel like something in the deck isn't working in the current matchup, you can take that out. Bring this in as just a generic floating memory that's fast speed, allowing you to have some versatility within the deck. Running 2 Hailstorm Guards. Now this has a class bonus of costing 2 less, so once you go into Nico level 2 this will cost 4. At Silvie it costs 6, so it is pretty expensive, hence why we're only running 2 sideboard. You could run, like, of course, a level 1 Nico deck as well, but you wouldn't be running all these animals, you'd be running other generic water allies. Where this becomes a lot better, because it has the next time damage we dealt to your champion this turn, prevent that damage, put an amount of cards from the top of your deck into your graveyard equal to the amount of damage prevented this way. This used to be a whole lot better, because you could prevent something like a 10 damage fireball, mill the top 10 cards of your deck, get a whole bunch of floating memory, and then pay 4 or 5 for a Lost in Thought, banishing that floating memory, drawing a bunch of cards, putting a bunch of lash counters on Nico, and then going for a massive swing on your next turn. Now this is really there for a situation where your opponent might be playing Tristan or something and they're going for a 1-hit kill, and you just need to hold up the cards and have that interaction to just stop them from killing you on that turn in order to win on your next turn. However, it's not going to be the most impactful card in this deck, hence why it's sideboard. 4 copies of Song of Frost sideboard. Now this is one of those cards that I kind of want to main board. I tried messing around with a few different numbers to bring 2 into main board. However, I just felt like the deck I've built is fairly consistent as it is. And due to Song of Frost not having floating memory, I didn't want to reduce the floating memory count main board in order to bring 2 of them in. So if there is a couple cards in the main board, like a couple of lineages or something that you can't get a hold of, or you just feel like it's not working as well as you would like it to, you could replace it with Song of Frost. Now, I've had a lot of questions about people wanting upgrades for the decks that I've been making. So I figured I'd put a small list together of stuff that if you already have access to it, or if you're looking at upgrading the deck slightly, that you may want to look at getting a hold of. For the material deck, we'll be looking at a Spirit of Serene Water. Now, the Serene Spirits have been going up in price quite a bit recently. Fire being the most, of course, due to all the Royal stuff going on. However, Spirit of Serene Water, I believe it's sitting about $15 to $20 at the moment, so not too bad. All this does is allow you to cycle away any cards you believe aren't going to be worthwhile in the matchup you've got ahead of you, or if you are looking for specific cards to allow you to go for either a fast or a controlling game, depending on what you need. This is just a good way to glimpse that away. Also, it has the lineage release of Recover 6, because you are going into Nico level 2, which is a water element itself, enabling water. When you lineage release, you're not going to lose access to your whole deck like you would in some other lists. Now, with the baubles and everything, you can replace one of them with a backup charger. Effectively, this means you're going to be guaranteed that draw every match rather than having to effectively have a dead card in your material deck. Same with Grand Crusader's Ring. It's generic, draw a card. This replaces all 3 baubles effectively because you're guaranteed to get that draw every game and not have to rely on having the correct bauble in your deck. However, if you do want to just run no baubles, backup charger is your draw power. You can also run Quicksilver Grail to have a bit of interaction, a bit of just outplaying your opponent. You can put something like the Nullifying Mirror under this. So if your opponent does go for a Veiling, you can in response crack Grail, bring Nullifying Mirror out, activate it so that that Veiling your opponent played now does absolutely nothing. With the main board upgrades, they are really there to make it more consistent into a wide range of decks. They do generally slow down the list a little bit because you're not going to have as many allies available to you. However, I do feel that they are decent upgrades if you can get a hold of them. Cerulean Decrees. It has multiple effects. It has the Imbue 3, so as long as you're paying 3 water to play it. The whole deck's water, you're going to always have the water cards to play it. Negate up to 1 target non-attack action card unless your opponent pays 2. So a lot of the time you're going to be able to use this interaction and then use its 3rd effect of draw a card into memory. But a lot of the time you can also use this to activate the 2nd effect of up to 1 target unit's attacks get -3 until end of turn. And to decks playing things like Rending, this is just super powerful because it effectively says your Rending is doing nothing. Whatever damage you can get onto the sword is all you're going to be allowed to do. Fracturize, one of the most powerful water cards in the deck. Target item weapon becomes a Cleric Fractal Fantasia with a reservable and loses all other abilities. Now that effect on its own would be super powerful and would be played, maybe not as much as it is, but it also has generic flowing memory. And it's 2 cost fast speed. Like, there's nothing negative about this card. Along with the backup charger, you can use backup charger, draw a card in memory, bring out a power cell, and then use this to create the power cell into a fractal. But also this can be used to interact with your opponent's stuff. If they've got a weapon you don't like, or just some item that's causing a problem for you, you can just fracturize it, making it a Cleric Fractal, and they're no longer going to have access to that. I won't get too deeply into layers and everything. The only thing to note is if you fracturize a Nullifying Lantern, the Nullifying Lantern still affects. However, if you fracturize a Sensor of Restful Peace, you will get your flow memory back. There are reasons behind it, different ways that layers interact. I'm not going to go into it right now, but trust me, that's how it works. Frostborn Paladin, I'd say the best ally in the game. It's a 2/3 3-drop with intercept. That alone is pretty powerful. but it also has on enter, you may banish a card with flow memory from your graveyard. If you do, put a buff counter on it and draw a card. So the way it reads is 3 cost, 3/4, that draws you a card in this deck. You're generally going to have a lot of flow memory in your graveyard, especially if you're able to turn 1, play a Chilling Touch, then follow up straight away, play this. You're just going to end up holding up 3 cards in hand, having a 3/4 on board, and just being able to control the game from there. Now, Frozen Dismissal is one of those ones that it's not needed, but it's hilarious to play into ally decks because a lot of the time they're wanting to get their allies on board and survive as long as possible. And with a lot of them, they're going to have a 7 influence consistently, trying to activate things like Gildas. So this basically goes, they play the 3-drop 2/3, you play this, counter unless they pay 4. A lot of the time they're either going to not have access to that 4 to pay it, or if they have something like a Grand Crusader's Ring or a Bauble out allowing them to draw, they then have to crack that draw, pay the 4 to allow that one ally to resolve, and then Gildas is suddenly a 1/3 standard. It's not a 4/3 as it would be with the balance effect active. It also is good into things like Dungeon Guide and level 3 decks that are running things that want to get their allies onto the field, like Ghost of Pendragons. And just, yeah, it's just good into a wide range of decks, hence why you probably want to run 2, maybe 3 in the deck. Maybe not main board, maybe sideboard, just depends on if you want to go more aggro or more control. Before we go into the price breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos. And also comment down below and let me know any decks you'd like me to try, design and build. I am messing around with a few different things at the moment, but I'm always open to some new ideas. We have the material deck coming in at $8.42, the main deck coming in at $40.36, and the sideboard coming in at $1.05. Now, with the main board, I did want to try to keep the price as low as possible for a lot of these decks. However, water is a very expensive element. Just every decent water card is $2 or $3, and it just makes it so hard to build a cheap deck while still being consistently good. So with this, a lot of our value comes from only 4 different allies, being Lunette being at $2 each actually. I did think it was a little bit more than that, but no, they're $2 each at the moment. Buy them now while they're cheap. Seaside Ringleader, another one, being $2.41. Again, I think that will go up to about $8, $9 we start seeing allies played again. Storm of Thorns, $2.15. This is another one that was like $4 or $5 when Silvie was strong. I don't see this going any higher, but for now, $2.15 isn't a bad price. And Ravishing Finale being $2.40. And Ravishing Finale being at $2.40. I remember selling Ravishings at like $20 plus. I don't know how it's so cheap. I guess that's just this type of game and the competitive market and just only wanting cards that are played competitively at the moment. So if somehow Nico does make a comeback and is shown to be good again, that will skyrocket again. But for now, it's only $2.40. Yes, the deck isn't doing any high competition wins or anything, or doing anything in the competitive market at the moment, but I do think the deck is still super solid. With that, our total comes to $49.83. I didn't change anything in the deck. I built the deck, I tested it, I went over and over again. I looked at it and decided, no, it is what it is. It's going to be a $60, $65 deck, and I'm just going to have to justify it somehow. But when adding up the totals, it came to $49.83. I didn't have to take anything out of the deck or change anything or try to reduce any of the expensive cards counts in order to get below the price threshold. So I'm just happy it's below it, and we'll take the win. Thank you for watching and all the support recently. I am looking at doing another giveaway soon, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. Until next time, stay safe.